So this one was Viper. There's a bee outside. Hello, sir. You can go somewhere else, please. Hey everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with my April Magical Readathon wrap up. As many of you know, because I have not shut up about it, I participated in the Magical Readathon in April. It's a two-part readathon. I participated in it every single year. It's in April and August, so we just had the Spring Equinox edition. I'll leave all my vlogs down below because, of course, I weekly vlogged the entire month because that's what I do now. So I'll leave those down below if you'd like to know in-depth thoughts on everything, in the moment thoughts on everything. But this is going to be my wrap-up of all those books, plus a couple of books that I was able to fit in that didn't count for any of those prompts. So like I said, check out the vlogs if you want to know what was Magical Readathon and what wasn't, because honestly at this point I can't remember what was and what wasn't. So let's dive in, because I read 15 things in April. So per usual, this is going to be a long video. Like I said, I read 15 things, and that was over the course of 5,061 pages and about 128.5 hours listened. And that was over 6 audiobooks, 3 physical books, and 6 mixed. We had pretty normal, well, I've been doing better at my age category as far as like spreading it out, because we had 1 middle grade, 3 YA, 1 new adult, and 10 adult books. So adult still wins, but I'm spreading it out better than I have been, so that's good. Genres were pretty normal for me. We had 8 fantasy, 5 romance, 1 nonfiction, and 1 contemporary. And then my ratings, I had 3 5-star, 8 4-star, and 4 3-star. So 4 was still number 1. That's just how it has been for some reason. The first book that I picked up was the 4th book in the Percy Jackson series, which is Percy Jackson, The Battle of the Labyrinth. And this is the almost last book. We have 1 more book in the series after this one, and so this one was really good. I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. It really set up the last one pretty well. Besides the first one, this is my favorite in the series. I think I just got really connected to the characters more. There was some other stuff going on that made me really care about it. It was action-packed, but not in a like stressful, can't catch my breath way, in a like things are happening and it's keeping my interest away, which I really liked. And what I'm noticing, I think, is I feel like the second one was my least favorite. Maybe I can't remember if it was the second one or the third one. I think it was the second one. Was my least favorite. It was the shortest in the series. And now Percy's getting older. In this book, he turns 15 by the end of it. So he's starting to get a little bit older. It's still written the same as far as like for young middle grade, you know, but his age is getting up there a little bit. And so he's starting to notice girls and really do like middle school teenage boy noticing of girls, which was really fun to read about and see him in that time frame for him. And it was just a lot of fun, honestly. So this one, again, it's the 4th in the series, so I can't really tell you a whole lot about what happened in this book, but the series follows Percy Jackson, who is a demigod, which means that one of his parents was a god. In his case, it's his dad. And he goes, the very first book, he goes to Camp Half-Blood, which is a camp for demigods because there are monsters and people out there that are trying to get the demigods because they don't like them for the power that they have, depending on whose parents god they're the kid of. So when he goes to the camp, he actually doesn't know which god his father is. So we figure that out in the first book, and then some crazy stuff happens in the first book, which kind of spirals into the rest of them. And so the big bad that we've been dealing with for 4 books now is we're going to get a conclusion in the next one. So I'm excited to see it come to an end because I feel like I need to know. Like I feel like this series is a decent length. If there was any more, I would probably start getting tired of it. But 5 I think is pretty good. We've got some answers. We have some things that we've learned. We have some people that we thought were bad that maybe weren't bad or are being manipulated. There's some extra stuff going on in this series, and I'm very interested to see how it's going to go, how it's all going to wrap up. But this one was good because, again, action-packed. It kept me hooked. We had some characters that we had been introduced to that have been going either off on different adventures or have been sent one way or the other because they just have like different things that they're doing, and so they all kind of came back. We got to see the core group back together in this one, which was really nice to see. and I'm excited for the next step. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm a little nervous because we've come to the end, but I love this series. I mean, clearly I read the third one at the very end of last month and picked the fourth one as my first book, so I needed to continue. So I'm excited to dive into more of the series, but I'm loving this one so far, and I get why people are obsessed with the series. The next one is just going to be an entire gush fest because it's Kingdom of the Feared by Kerri Maniscalco, which is the third and final book in the Kingdom of the Wicked trilogy, although I have now learned that there's going to be a book that's coming out later this year that's like a spin-off of the series, and I am so emotionally ready because I got so invested in the series and I'm so sad to see it gone. Clearly, this one got 5 stars. It's my new favorite fantasy romance series. I keep talking about it. It's right up there with ACOTAR as far as like how much of an obsession I have with this. Trigger warnings for gore, blood magic, that kind of stuff. If you were like me and a wimp, just be wary that stuff's there. But beyond that, it's pretty normal fantasy stuff. This one was really good because I feel like it wrapped up the series in a very satisfying way. It answered a lot of the questions. Like, we had some answers in the second book, but we got the rest of the answers clearly in this one, with it being the final book. I loved it. It's really close. I think the second one is still my favorite in the series, but it's like a very close, like neck and neck for favorite. I've really, really enjoyed the series. It has literally taken over my life. I'm obsessed with the character of Wrath as just a morally gray main love interest. I love him so much, and seeing his connection and his relationship with Amelia, our main character, it's just so fun to read about, and that continues in this one, and we finally get some moments that we've been asking for 2 books now. But this series kicks off in Kingdom of the Wicked with our main character Amelia, and it starts with the very, very brutal murder of her sister, her twin sister Victoria, and she's trying to figure out what's going on. Her grief has like manifested into anger, as a lot of grief does, and she's determined to figure out who did it, because there is a string of women who have been killed in the similar way that her sister did. They're also witches, and all these women who have been killed have been witches. So she's like, there's a connection here, and she ends up teaming up with Wrath, who is one of the 7 princes of hell. And he has his own reasons for wanting to figure out who has been killing all these women and why. And so he and her kind of team up in the first book to do that. And that just scratches the surface. This book is definitely new adult. It starts YA. The first book is definitely YA. But the second book and the third one in the series are new adult/adult. And I loved the progression of that. It makes sense for the plot and how it changes so that those elements would change as well. It's primarily with sexual content, so that also changes in the next couple of books. I loved it. I loved a good morally gray character. Like I said, this one is becoming my favorite obsession, in the sense of like, my aunt is also a big reader, and she's been going through all of the, ACOTAR and all the Sarah J. Maas books, and she needed some new ones. I told her to read the series. She's now read it and is obsessed with it like I am, so that just like feels good, like someone is also obsessed with the series that you're obsessed with. But this one was really good, and I loved the conclusion, and I'm curious to see what the spinoff is going to be, but I liked how it ended. I loved it. It has a little bit of like Fated Mates vibes as well. If like that's your thing, that's not what's in this book, but it has that vibe, as well as Hate to Love and banter as like a love language, that kind of thing. If all of those things are your vibe, then I highly recommend the series because I'm obsessed. I want to, like, the minute I finished this book, I wanted to go back and reread them because that's how much I loved them, and I do not reread books, so that's saying something. The next one was my Highland Guard buddy read that I'm doing with my friend Taylor, The Viper by Mona McCarty. This is the 4th book in this series, which is basically this secret guard for Robert the Bruce. It's a Scottish Highland romance, and he has a secret guard of 12 who all have like a code name so that they keep their identity secret, and they're each really good at one thing. So this one was Viper. So this follows our main character Lachlan, who is the Viper, and this woman named Bella. And this one ended up getting 3 stars for me because I did enjoy the story of them. I thought it was interesting. It was kind of like they were obsessed with each other early on, and it has happened over many years, like they haven't found anybody else kind of thing. But There's a lot of time jumps in this. Like, it starts in one place and we've got a bunch of chapters in that thing, and then it skips 5 years, and then we have a bunch of chapters in that time period, and then it skips again to the end. We have a bunch of, you know, chapters in that time period. And so, like, it's spread out over the course of, like, I want to say like 5 years or something like that. So you have to pay attention to the time stamps on all the chapters, which is fine, but I think that amount of time jumping really detracted from it because the beginning was so slow. So it wasn't until about halfway that I started to really get invested, because the halfway point, if I remember correctly, is where the present time period is. That's where it starts. And so that's when everything really starts happening. And it just jumps all over the place. And so it kind of had me reeling a little bit. The romance was fine. It was definitely the definition of hate to love, in my opinion. It started off very, very physical as far as the physical attraction, and then it moved to other things. There's a lot of miscommunication in here. Okay, miscommunication might be the wrong word, but like, well, no, miscommunication, because like there are some things about him that is like common knowledge, but they're not real. Like, that's not really what happens. He just kind of like lets people believe what they want about him, including her, and he doesn't ever correct her on her incorrect opinions about him. And so she eventually will learn the correct. I'm trying to be super vague and it's not working. So it is in that sense. So I guess you would consider that miscommunication now that I think about it, but it has that element to it. So it's just different, you know? So there's a lot about this that should have worked more than it did. And again, I think this one comes off of my favorite in the series, and that one was like 5-star. I would give it 10 stars if I could. And that one was just so good that anything that came after it, I think is going to suffer by comparison, because I loved that one so much. So this one just happened to be it, and it was a slow start, and because of that, it just kind of detracted from my enjoyment. But it basically is Lachlan and this woman named Belle, and he is intent on like saving her. She's basically been captured, and she's like, I think, a sister of Robert, who is, you know, the possible king of Scotland. And so because of that, he's trying to get her back, and she thinks differently of him for certain reasons. So that's super, super vague, but there's a lot of stuff in this book. So huge trigger warnings for sexual assault and torture in this book. It's on the page. Maybe sexual assault's not on the page, but it's talked about. Torture's definitely on the page. And there's a lot between them. So this one's one of the harder books, I want to say, in the series as far as like the content. They're all not great because, again, it's set historically, but this is one of the tougher ones, I want to say. So just be wary of that. It's not my favorite in the series. I'm not as like, Lachlan as a character is fine. I like the progression we see with him, but he is not my favorite character to begin with, and he doesn't really redeem himself a whole lot in this. So he was okay, but I enjoyed it. I got enough enjoyment that I was able to give it 3 stars. I'm still very, very excited for the rest of the series. And as we continue to get more and more people that I've got my like names that are clicking, that I'm really interested to see their stories and how things go. But this one, as far as the series goes, this one was one of the misses for me, and that's fine, but it still got 3 stars. So it was a miss, but not like a huge miss. The next one I picked up was the second in the Once Upon a Broken Heart series, The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. I love this one. I gave it 4.5 stars. There's a few things about this that really stuck out to me. The first one is how it started. This is the sequel, so it has to find a way of reminding you what happens in the first book, and it does it in a very, very clever way. Based on how the first one ends, this one starts with our main character Evangeline writing herself a reminder letter in her diary, and in doing so, she is reminding herself / us, the reader, what happened in the first book and kind of where she stands with some of the characters. So that I thought was really clever. It was a very easy way to just quickly remind the reader what's going on, but as far as the plot goes, it made a lot of sense for our character to do that. So while in some other instances it might feel like a cop-out, for this one it didn't, because it felt like that's what needed to happen for these characters. But I really liked that. The character of Jax, based on some stuff that happened at the end of the last book, I was afraid wasn't going to show up nearly as much as in the first one, because I really love the relationship between him and Evangeline. I mean, it's really just a frenemy at this point, but there's hints for more. And because of that, and again, because of the stuff that happened in the first book, I was really worried we weren't going to see him. But a lot of my favorite scenes are the scenes when they're in the scene together. So I was really glad that we got a lot of those, which was exciting. And then the ending. The ending had me shook. If you've seen my vlog, I recorded my reactions to the end of this book. That just happened to be, as I was reading the end, what I was recording. So I got lucky with that because it has like a false ending. It like ends and then it goes, just kidding. And then it gets back into the story and there's a couple more chapters. But I was shocked. Like I thought the book was just going to end and we were going to be, but there's still a third one. I was so confused. And the way this ended left me so interested to see about the third one because it's coming out in, I want to say September this year. And it's the last book in this trilogy. And I am emotionally invested. So it took me a while to get into this one. I'm not sure why that was, if I just put too much time between the first and the second one, if it was a little bit slower at the beginning of this volume, but there was definitely some stuff that kind of slowed it down a little bit. But once I got invested, I was invested. And I was reminded how much I loved the first one. And I'm so obsessed with this series and these characters. And I love them, okay? The moral of the story is I love them. This series follows Evangeline, whereas in the first one, it basically, she sees the person that she's convinced that she's in love with marrying somebody else. So she goes to a fate who is Jax. He is the fate of broken hearts. And she basically asks him to stop the wedding. No matter what, just make the wedding not happen. In exchange, he says that he is going to claim 3 kisses from her. And those kisses, because he can't kiss anyone except for his true love. So and if he does, they die. So she can't kiss him. So these are kisses that he is going to basically be like, hey, go kiss that person. You have an hour to do so. And so there's a reason why he wants her to do certain things. And so we learn more about him in the first book. The stuff and the mystery continues. And this one, it reminds me of Kingdom of the Feared in the sense of, not in the sense of anything with the plot or anything with the vibes of these characters, but in the sense of how information is given. In the second book, we are given some information. We are given enough that we still have a ton of questions, but we have enough that we are satisfied that we are getting answers. And then I'm assuming in the third book, we're going to get all of the answers because there's definitely some stuff that is revealed in this book, but not everything is revealed. And that's how I felt reading that series. So I very much enjoyed this. I was worried because, again, the beginning was a little rough as far as my enjoyment in it, but it just got better and better. So I loved it. I loved it. The next one that I picked up is the 10th volume of Dreaming Sun by Ichigo Taganu. I did it. I finished this series. This one got 3 stars, which is pretty, I feel like, normal for me at this point. And now I can unhaul this series because while I enjoyed the very beginning, it just kind of went downhill throughout the rest of this. I've talked about this basically since I read volume like 5. So I'm happy that I have conclusions, but I have questions about said conclusions because there's like a time jump. So like the first couple of chapters in this book, it happened right after the events of the last one, which is pretty normal for this series. They just kind of happen back to back as far as timeline goes. And then it jumps like 2 years in the future. And I don't like it. I don't like what they did. They continued with the love interest that I'm not a fan of, which I figured they were going to do. They took it in a way that I wasn't prepared for. I thought I knew where this was going to end, and it didn't. It jumped 2 years in the future of where I thought it was going to end. And so there's definitely some stuff that's talked about, but there's just a lot of stuff with the relationship in this book that I don't agree with. Although the time gap's not great, it was less than I thought it was. So that made me feel a little bit better, especially because these people, like, she's in high school and the person that she is in love with is not. He is beyond high school. He's in the workforce. And so that relationship was weird, but like kind of by the end, it was legal. I don't know. It was just, there was some questionable decisions as far as the relationship, and it just continued. So, it ended like I thought it was going to, in the sense of I thought that the romance was going to end the way that it did, but it also took it like one step further, and I was like, this feels like a bit much. There was some very, very sweet moments between characters. We did see some conclusions to a lot of the relationships and the friendships in this and how that went. So that was nice. Got to see some closure with some characters, which I really liked. There were some very, very sweet moments between our main character and the love interest, even though I'm not in love with the idea of the love interest. they had some very sweet moments, and I did enjoy that once I kind of, you know, got on board. But there's just something about them that I just can't do it. Like, there's something that won't let me like their relationship, even though they've been pushing it for half of the series. There's just something that doesn't hit right. So I enjoyed it. I'm glad that I've come to the end. I think if there was any more volumes, I would probably have given up by now, but I'm glad that I've come to the end. I've officially finished my first full-length, long manga series. I don't think I wasted my time. I think I had a good time reading it. I think it just, if it had gone in a different direction, or if the ages weren't as drastic, then I probably would have gotten on board faster and really gotten involved and invested in it, but it just took me a while to do that, which is fine. But now we've moved on. So 3 stars, and now I'm done. So 1 series completely completed, which is exciting. The next book that I picked up was Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. This one got 4.5 stars from me. I am obsessed with this. I finally read it. It took me 10,000 years to read it, but I finally read it. We buddy read it with my friend Lauren, and it was great. I cried. So it was on this TBR because I thought I was going to cry, and I did. There are quite a few trigger warnings. So obviously, okay, let me tell you what this book's about, and then we'll get to the trigger warnings. So this follows our main character Wallace, who at the beginning of the book dies, and he's at his own funeral, which is very sparsely attended. It's him, his ex-wife. Well, he's there in spirit, but it's his ex-wife and his partners. He's in a law firm, and no one is particularly wanting to be there. He assumed people would really like him, and liked his very rule-following way that he ran his business, and nobody did. And so he's kind of like thrown for a loop, and then this woman shows up who is basically a reaper, and in a sense, and she basically brings him to this tea shop. And there's a man at this tea shop called Hugo, and his job is basically to help these spirits cross over. And so this tea shop is kind of like in limbo. It's an actual tea shop. People come to it because Hugo and this woman who brought him are human and they're alive, but they can see the dead. And so while he's there, he is learning more about Hugo. He's learning more about himself. He really kind of does not a 180, but kind of a 180 on his personality, and figures out just some things about him. So because of that, trigger warnings. Obviously, death and grief are a huge part of this. They do talk about suicide a lot in this, so trigger warnings for that. Not necessarily like on page, like there's nothing like that, but there are people who have passed on via suicide, and so they have conversations about what that does. And then obviously there's some animal death in this as well, so if you're privy to any of those, be wary. But some interesting things that I thought was interesting is that it's a male romance, which is pretty normal for TJ Klune. We have some representation on depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. So I guess trigger warning for panic attacks if you are someone who doesn't like to read about them happening, because Hugo does have those. And so we see him go through one, and Wallace kind of like helping him through it. I love them. Okay. Nothing happens in this book. I mean, things happen. There is a plot, but it's so much more about character development, which should not work for me. Nothing about that sounds interesting. I am more of a plot person than a character person. I've always said that, and I think I always will be. But something about these characters and the way that I got so invested in them from like page 1, and the fact that this is mostly character development. The point of the story is to watch Wallace go from where he died, like this person of when he died, and like kind of doing an entire character development, an entire switch of his personality, and what's important to him by the end, because he doesn't consider himself a good person. I mean, he did, and then when he died, he looked kind of back at his life, and he's like, oh, maybe I wasn't a good person, and he's switching into being a good person. So it's all about him and his little journey of self-discovery. Why does that sound interesting? That shouldn't sound interesting to me, and yet I couldn't put it down. I was emotionally invested in them, and like we sectioned this so that we read it in 5 days, and the last section, which was probably about, I think it was about 60 to 70 pages a day, the last like 60 pages of this book I read on the way home, listened to the audiobook on the way home, and I just sobbed the whole time. Okay, just sobbed the whole time. Not in like a things were sad, but like things were sad, you know? It clicked on all of the like little triggers that make me cry. That's what happened in this book. and I was just so emotionally invested, and I couldn't see a way out, and then a way out was presented and I was shocked. So this took me on an emotional roller coaster. I understand why people are talking about it and why people say it's going to take you on an emotional roller coaster, because boy does it. Boy does it. I love Clune's writing, which I always forget about until I've read one thing by him, so it's not an always, but like I've forgotten that how much I loved his writing, and it worked really well for this because there were so many humorous moments in this, with Wallace kind of figuring out how to be this like spirit and this ghost thing that can't, like, for example, he can't touch stuff. And so there's a lot of moments of humor within this, which I thought was a really good thing, because this is such a tough subject. It's about afterlife, it's about the what next, it's about death. That's not a easy topic to have a conversation about, and the fact that he can do this and have these very real moments in Wallace's life, and Wallace kind of looking back in these very real conversations between Wallace and Hugo, and yet being able to pepper in all of these really, really humorous moments. And Wallace's wit is so good. He just has a very funny way of looking at the world, and the way that he reacts to certain things is just very, very relatable, in my opinion. So Clune does a perfect job at being able to have these very deep and dark and tough conversations, but also being able to bring in the humor and the lightness of that, so that it's not just all like death and sadness, which is just a tough book to read if that's the only thing that it's about, which there are books out there like that, and if that's your thing, that's great. But I appreciated that this had some humor moments to it, so I just loved it. The plot was great from little plot we got, and I love TJ Klune. I've just become obsessed with his stuff now, and I will pretty much read anything he's written, because he writes some pretty outlandish plot-wise stuff that should not work, and I am obsessed with them. So I will read all things by him at this point. Okay, the next book I picked up was The Belle of Belgrave Square by Mimi Matthews, which is the second in the Belle of London's series, the first one being Siren of Sussex, which I read end of last year. I'm obsessed with this one. This one got 5 stars from me. I loved this one more than the first one. The first one is a clean romance. Absolutely nothing happens. This one does, because there is a couple of moments, but it's relatively clean. So if you want a clean romance, this is a decent book. It's not like described or anything like that. I will say trigger warnings for like medical stuff. So if you have any sort of like medical trauma, they do a lot of bloodletting in this book, or at least talking about it. And that is not something I discovered was a trigger for me until I read a specific scene in this that kind of kicks off the plot in this story. And that was rough. I had to pause it a couple of times. And there's also some rep for anxiety, because our main character suffers from really, really bad social anxiety. So this follows our 2 main characters, Julia and Captain Jasper Blunt. And Julia, we met in the first book. She is one of the friends in this little kind of like core group of friends, and she has really, really bad social anxiety. So she meets Captain Jasper in the last book and basically freaks out and runs away. So in this book, it starts with her kind of running into him while she's on a horse. She loves riding. Her favorite things in life are reading and riding her horse. And so she's out early one morning, and she runs into him, and she apologizes for the way that she acted. And his goal is basically he needs money. He's got some kids at home, and he has a crumbling estate. And so he's trying to make up for the fact that he has no money. And so he's trying to marry a wealthy woman so he can kind of like get the estate back up and running the way it should be. But also to take care of his kids. And so she comes from 2 parents who are sickly all of the time. And she's not particularly a sickly person, but she feigns it sometimes to get out of some social stuff because of said anxiety. And so the 2 of them meet, and he's determined that she's going to be the one that he marries. And so it is a marriage of convenience. Arranged marriage maybe is not the right thing, but it's like that kind of situation. So it is so good. I love their relationship. Their conversations are genuinely so good and intuitive, and like within a couple of chapters I was already emotionally invested in them as a couple, because they had these super real conversations. And because she is so afraid of like society and being out like that, she kind of hides herself away, and he is very much like no nonsense in the sense of like when they're together, he's like, you know what, Don't worry about what is societally appropriate to talk about. Tell me what you're really thinking and what you're really feeling. And so from like the page one, they have very real conversations about stuff that they probably wouldn't tell other people, or they wouldn't have in other polite society and stuff like that. So I loved their conversations. Again, I was emotionally invested in them from the get-go, and it just kind of spiraled from there. I loved their relationship. He gives off major Darcy vibes. So if you like that, he's much less stuck up than Darcy, let's say, but he definitely gives off those closed off vibes. And there's an element of them both bonding over a specific author, which is really sweet to read about. And there's a lot of kind of like secrets that surround him. He's a war hero. He doesn't want to talk about his time during the war, and she really wants to get to know him. So there's a lot of stuff that gets revealed at the end of this, which I did not see coming. I saw one thing coming. I did not see something else coming. So that was a little shocked. And I just really enjoyed it. If you want a good historical romance, this is a good one for you. I just loved the genuine care that they had for one another, and like their love felt genuinely realistic as far as like the progression of it and how it worked. I just really loved that about them. I loved seeing them be so open and honest with their feelings and their conversations and everything like that. So, and there is like, I would not say it's miscommunication. There's definitely, like I mentioned, some stuff in his past that he has to work through. And because of the nature of it, why he keeps certain things from her is very realistic. Like, it's not, miscommunication to me is not like someone purposefully keeping information. It's someone unknowingly not saying something, and that's causing issues. In this book, he purposely doesn't tell her certain things because of the nature of what those things are. So if someone was in the situation that he was in, I know they would keep secrets too. So it's like the way that they did it felt realistic. Like, I wasn't upset that he was keeping these secrets because I felt like he needed to for what they were. I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it. But the like miscommunication didn't feel like miscommunication to me. So I really enjoyed them, and I loved everything about this. And I did review this as a NetGalley arc, so I'll leave my Goodreads review down below if you'd like to check it out. But I'm just emotionally invested in them as a couple. And the next two books in that series come out next year, and I'm so ready. The next book that I picked up was Death of the Priory by James Rudick, which is my nonfiction for the month. This one, just trigger warnings, it is a true crime book, so like so many things could be trigger warnings, but trigger warnings for sexual or domestic abuse, alcoholism, abortion, and miscarriage. So all of those are talked about, and because this is true crime and because of the way that this is formatted, they are not handled delicately, let's say. It's more just like, the first part of this book is our author basically giving us the facts of the case, because this was unsolved until recently. And then the second half is him kind of diving into, now that we have maybe more technology and people are more open about certain things, he's able to get more information than like the police were at the time. So he's able to come to a conclusion. But the first part of this book is just him telling you the facts of the case. And because of that, these topics are not handled in a sensitive way, in the sense of like, he's literally just relaying facts. So they are just very abruptly mentioned. So that's why I wanted to mention those, because it's a little rough. This book follows this, I guess, story is a true crime story of our main character named Florence. It takes place in 1875. So definitely historical, but she is a widow and basically comes into a giant inheritance and buys this place called the Priory, and then ends up getting married to, I think, a lawyer, if that's right. Maybe I made that part up. Either way, her second husband, basically, their relationship was not good. It was abusive, and a lot of stuff was going on there. And he one day just drops dead of poison, and they can't figure out what's going on and who did it. And so, again, the first half of this book is just all the facts from the case, and then the second half is this author kind of diving into more information and actually giving his actual legit information on what he thinks happened. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I felt like the writing was rough. I understand the point of why you needed to just kind of abruptly tell all the facts at the beginning before you can dive into what you think happened, but it just was written in not an interesting way, so it kind of got boring after a while. So the middle chunk was boring. The beginning was interesting because I liked learning about the facts and kind of the backstory of who she is, because we do get her entire history. And then the end, when he said, like, here's what I think happened and what actually, like, let me lay out what happened. But all, like, there's like a middle section that's just kind of like fluff, it feels like, and this is not a big book. So it shouldn't feel like fluff, and it felt like fluff. And so I was about like 50-60% of the way through, and I was like already getting bored, and I just kind of wanted the end. But I was invested enough because I wanted to figure out what he concluded is what happened, but I didn't care about it. And so I kind of skimmed most of this book. I'm not gonna lie, until we got to like the end where he said what he actually thought happened. But it was fine. I don't feel like I need to hold on to it. It was an interesting story. I'm glad I read it because I do enjoy true crime, especially historical true crime. I think that's really interesting. So that was interesting. There was just a lot of tough stuff when it comes to this one because of the nature of her as a person and a lot of the stuff that she has gone through. She did not have an easy life. And because of that, this case is really, really tough to talk about. So it's fine. I'm glad I read it. 3 stars. We can move on now. The next one is one that I was very invested in as well. And I do actually own this book. I just lent my copy to a friend, so I don't have it anymore, but that's Anna Maria and the Fox by Liana De La Rosa. This is my book of the month book for, what month were we in? April. And I actually read this with my coworker because she also gets book of the month, and we ended up getting the same book. We've done that again, actually, so we're probably going to be buddy reading some more of those, which is good because I need the push to actually read my book of the month books. Anyway, I gave this 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed this. This book is actually the first in a series. It's called the Lunar Sisters Trilogy. So this follows Anna Maria, obviously, and she is the oldest of 3 sisters. So each book is going to follow a different sister, and I'm very excited about that. We know who the next one's going to be about, but it hasn't been announced yet as far as like anything about it. So if you go on Goodreads, this is the only thing in the series right now. So I am very excited for the rest of this series. But this follows Anna Maria and her 2 sisters who are from Mexico, and their father is very high up in the government, and the government is dealing with an invasion from Napoleon. So she and her sisters are sent to England as a way of escaping from being used as pawns against their father. And so they come to London, and everyone knows that they're from Mexico, but they don't know the connection. They've kind of changed their name a little bit, their last name a little bit. And she runs into this guy named Gideon, who is mixed race, and he is an MP in Parliament. And his whole thing is to stop the slave trade. The 2 of them meet, and they have a very fun interaction. She's very real with him, and he likes that. They have a lot of the same wants and beliefs, which is interesting, but she's actually engaged to someone, and so nothing can happen from that. And so it's the 2 of them kind of like struggling against their feelings towards one another. I kind of the same as how I felt about Belle of Belgrave Square. Loved their conversations. It was really nice because, again, they were so realistic. He has had to go through and figure out what is correct to say in society. And so she is dealing with that. And so they can bond over the fact that he's kind of helping her a few times figure out what to say and what not to say, but also like they can be themselves around each other because they're both outcasts in a certain light. And so I loved their conversations. There's some very deep conversations. They both bond over their religion as well, which I feel like you don't see a lot. It's present in a lot of historical fiction, historical romances, but it's not talked about a whole lot. And so religion's a big thing for both of them. And so to see them have that, it's a relatively sweet romance. They have a lot of really, really sweet conversations with each other. It's a little bit of forbidden love in a sense because of the whole like fiance part. But the reason I didn't get 5 stars is because there was a plot, but it didn't really kick off until the middle of the book. So there's this section about like 30 to 40% of the way through the book where I was now emotionally invested in the characters, but nothing was happening, and I was starting to get a little bit bored because all we were doing was having conversations between our characters, which should be fine, but the plot itself wasn't moving forward, so we needed something to kick it off, and that's really what 50%, something happened 50% of the way through that kicked off the rest of the story. So then the plot started to really get going, and that's when I got really invested. Also, there were some things that happened at the end of the book. Like there were some questions and some people that weren't addressed. And I feel like we need solutions to them. And the solution, there's one I'm thinking of specifically. The solution I got didn't feel like a solution. It felt like a write-off so that we wouldn't question that section of it. And so there's just some things that I feel like needed to be wrapped up better or need to be addressed maybe in the later books. But considering this is a companion series, we're not going to be focusing on Anna Maria anymore. We're going to be focusing on one of her sisters. So there's just some stuff that I felt like needed to be wrapped up better than it was. Also, one thing that drove me nuts is the author really liked the words "a pregnant pause." She used them all of the time. And I am not observant when it comes to the writing a lot of the time. And if I'm noticing that, it's used too much. So I literally have a note that's saying that she used it all the time. And I shouldn't have been able to notice that, but I did. And it was like, it's like the new, she let go of a breath she never knew she was holding. Like that's how much it was used. It felt like that. So now I'm never going to be able to see anybody use a pregnant pause in writing ever again, because like without getting annoyed. It was just too much. But that was the only big thing. Otherwise, it was a great book. It got 4.5 stars. It was just that one freaking sentence. Like, why? So the next book that I picked up was Restless Slumber by KJ Sutton, which is the second book in the Fortuna Sworn series. This got 5 stars. I am obsessed with this series. It started off right after the events of the first book, and it dealt with the repercussions of kind of what happened in the first book. There's a lot of familial strife within this book. KJ Sutton's really good about writing trigger warnings or content warnings, so just double check all of her books. This one specifically, it deals with themes more than actually seeing things on the page. The ones that stuck out to me were themes of slavery, domestic abuse, suicide, and rape. So this series is a good series if you like the ACOTAR series, but it's significantly harder to get through. Like, as far as the topics, it's significantly darker of topics because of all of those themes I just mentioned. Whereas I think ACOTAR has those, but it's not nearly as traumatic, I think, as these. I loved Fortuna Sworn, and so I'm emotionally invested in them now. I'm hoping to get to the 3rd one this month. We'll see. I loved them so much, and the relationship in here between Fortuna and the male love interest is fantastic. I really enjoyed seeing that blossom some more. I love seeing Fortuna kind of start to rely on people. I saw like I found family vibe of sorts within this book, and it really kind of started to solidify near the end of this, and that was really nice to see. The ending is what I'm questioning, okay? Because, and I mentioned this in my vlogs, is that I still got 5 stars because I was so emotionally invested, but something happened at the end of this book that made me very uncomfortable. And again, like I mentioned in my vlogs, I don't think it's a thing where the author did something that I felt like was wrong. It was the character chose a path, and I did not like the path or the situation that the character chose. I liked the outcome of said plan and choice, but the actual choice itself, I did not like. So because of that, the next book is going to be trauma-filled. I just know it. It's going to be dealing with trauma and the repercussions and like the PTSD from that. So I have this suspicious feeling that the 3rd book is going to be the hardest one to get through, because we're going to have all of these really dark and deep conversations. But as far as this one goes, it just continued with the plot. I loved it. I loved seeing our main characters' chemistry between one another, and I don't really know where we're going to go in here. I thought we were going to get a love triangle, honestly, based on some of the choices within this book, but I don't think we are. I think I'm like pretty confident in how this book ended that we're not going to get a love triangle. So fingers crossed. But this series basically follows Fortuna Sworn, who in the first book, it's been a couple of years since her brother has gone missing, and everyone's convinced that he is dead, but she is not. And she and her brother are both what's called a nightmare, which is basically like this magical ability where they can see a person's biggest fear and make it come to life. And at the beginning of the first book, she gets approached by this guy who's a fae, and he says that he knows where her brother is and he can take her to her, but she has to marry him. And so she does, and it spirals from there. So this just continues from that. It's twice the length of that one. The 3rd one, I think, might not be twice the length of this one, but they're just getting bigger and bigger. And honestly, big books scare the bejeebus out of me, and I'm just so excited for them. Like, the 4th book in this series is almost 700, no, it's over 700 pages, I want to say, and I just can't wait to get to that because I know that it's just going to be so good. And I just love the characters and the storytelling and everything about KJ Sutton as an author makes me really happy. So I'm excited to dive into more stuff by her. But also another obsession of mine besides like Kingdom of the Wicked series, Fortuna Sworn. It's going to be a new obsession and everyone should read it. That's all I'm saying. The next one I picked up was the third volume of Lore Olympus by Rachel Smith. This one I ended up giving 4 stars to. I had a lot of mixed feelings, even though it got 4 stars about this one. So this series is a graphic novel series that you can read for free online. It's on the app Webtoons, but it's basically a reimagining of the Hades and Persephone story. Some trigger warnings for themes of sexual assault and rape within this book, so just be wary of that. Specifically this one, because of said events that happened in the first volume, there's a lot of trauma from that and a lot of like, not flashbacks because you don't really see anything on the page, but with this one it's handled more than the last volume was, so just kind of be wary if those are triggers for you because it's a little bit more on the page. But this one, what I liked about this is that there's a conversation in here about an event that happened in the first book that hasn't really been addressed, and our main character's been dealing with this by herself. And so in this volume, she kind of confides in one of her friends, and it's a friend that I never expected her to confide in, but the fact that she did, and the fact that they had this very adult conversation about it, and the fact that the friend did what I would assume is honestly the best thing that you could do in a situation like that, which is be there for your friend, but also voice your opinion about what's going on and be like, hey, I'm here for you, but you need to talk to someone about this. And so I feel like that scene, it was literally like a blip in this story, but it was my favorite part of this volume, and it really made this a pretty high volume for me because they finally had a conversation about this thing that's been kind of over Persephone's head for 2 volumes. I'm interested to see what the next one's going to be because like the next volume, I read the synopsis of it. It comes out in June, and I read the synopsis of what's going to happen in that one, and it just feels like more, it's going in like more plot, which is what I want, because this one is, the first volume or 2 was basically just pining between Hades and Persephone, which is great. I don't mind the slow burn. I don't mind the mutual pining. I love that they are very interested in one another. I need something else. There's just more pining in this volume, and like they're trying, there's like a forbidden love element to it as well, and they either need to act on their feelings or shut down their feelings. Like those are the 2 options, because nothing is happening and I'm starting to get tired of the slow burn. I need something else, which is why I'm conflicted, because I still really love these characters. I love the art style. I think it's absolutely beautiful. I'm obsessed with it, and I'm going to keep reading them. There's 2 more physical volumes planned at this point, and I'm sure there's going to be more after that. But I am emotionally invested in them, so I will continue to read them, but I'm starting to get tired of that kind of element without any plot happening. So I'm excited that maybe the next volume will have more plot, because that's really what I want. And maybe people will talk about the problems. That's also something that I want. But I got 4 stars because I'm still obsessed with this graphic novel and I love this series, so I will continue to read them, but I am getting a little tired of some elements of it. The next one, this was my week of Hades and Persephone retellings. This is the last week of the readathon, because I also picked up A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair, which I did end up giving 4 stars to because I was invested in the story and the characters, but I had a lot of thoughts at the end of this because, again, Hades and Persephone, it felt hyped. It felt way too overhyped, in my opinion. So this book is, I'm sure many people have heard this series. It is a series that everybody and their brother and mother and best friend's mother like was talking about on social media. It was really, really hyped online, and it was specifically hyped because people loved the fantasy romance elements to it, but also like everyone was saying the smut in this book was amazing. Okay, I went in hearing mixed opinions because it's been out for a little bit, so I'd heard some mixed opinions about this book. Some people loved it, some people didn't. I was excited to see what my thought was. I liked their relationship. I thought they had a lot of good moments. I'm not going to continue with this series because I got what I wanted from them. Like, this had an ending that I was like, I'm satisfied with this ending, and I know the next 2 books in this series are going to challenge that ending and cause unnecessary drama between our main 2 characters, and I don't need that. I am happy. I am happy with how this ended, and I don't really need any more. I don't need to read the spinoff series where it's from Hades' perspective. I'm good. So I'm not going to continue, but I am happy that I read this because now I know, and I am curious what the hype was with this one, because again, I think it was overhyped. I think a lot of people loved this, and this was the first of its kind, but I feel like there's way more. This was also her debut series, so I'm interested to see what her other one, Kingdom of Battle and Blood, I've got the first one in that series, so I'm interested to see what that one's going to be like, because it's been a little bit, so maybe that one is going to be maybe a little bit better now that she's had some writing under her belt. But like, this one was fine. I mean, the tension was great. There was a lot of tension between our characters, a lot of really like romantic moments. But as far as the smut goes, I've read better. I liked it. Don't get me wrong. I still gave it 4 stars. There's a lot about this book that I enjoyed, but just some of the elements were, I don't know. I think it all stems down to, it was overhyped, so I just felt like it was okay. And I feel like I could do better. Like the Dark Olympus series, for example, by Katie Robert. If you want something like this, that one is a fantastic series. It has the same vibes as the Hades and Persephone within this book. There's a lot about the Hades characters that are reminiscent of each other. There's a lot of stuff about just like, take away the fact that they're both Hades and Persephone retellings. There's a lot about the plot that is very reminiscent, in my opinion, to the two of them. And also the smut is better. So that's what I think. I know that a lot of people love this one, but it wasn't for me. I mean, I'm glad I read it. I still tabbed a lot of it because there's still a lot of scenes that I really enjoyed, and the struggle that Persephone has with her mother is really interesting in this book, but I don't know. I feel like it was just crazy overhyped. I then picked up some random things near the end of the month. The first one being Can't Escape Love by Alyssa Cole, which is a novella in the Reluctant Royal series, which means I now only have 1 full-length novel left, and then I'll be done. I gave this one 3.5 stars. It's a novella, so when it's a romance novella, it's kind of hard to build up the romance realistically because you don't have a lot to work with. So she tried within this one. There was a lot of pre-existing stuff between our main 2 characters before this book started, but I felt like it was very insta-lovey. It jumped really quickly, and the thing that should have worked is that the author kept, like, our characters kept saying, it's really, really fast to be feeling these things, but I am feeling them, and that should have helped. It was like the author's way of basically being like, I acknowledge that this is happening fast, but it works because they're saying it, and it still felt too fast, even though they were saying, we feel like this is too fast, we understand this could be too fast. Them saying that didn't help it. This book, I should probably tell you what it's about, follows our main character, Regina, or Reggie, and she has trouble falling asleep. She has really bad insomnia, and she stumbled across this gamer named Gus. So he's like not a gamer in a sense of like Twitch streams and stuff, but like game, like puzzles and that kind of thing. And she was his only viewer, and so they bonded a lot. And so he had all this archive which has gone away, and she used to listen to his voice to fall asleep, and it's gone, and so she's freaking out. And so she reaches out to him to basically be like, hi, I need your voice, please help. And he is like not an architect, but he's basically planning an escape room based on this anime that he's never watched, and so she's obsessed with it. And so they kind of create this pact where like he'll call her at night and like use his voice and read these really dumb manuals to help her fall asleep, and she'll help him plan this escape room. And in doing so, she'll be considered a consultant, which will help her own business. So there's a lot of stuff here, and they have like this pre-existing relationship. They didn't know each other. It was very anonymous, but they still had this pre-existing relationship. And so there's that element to it, but it was just like, it was fun. It was cute. They had a lot of really sweet moments. I liked their romance. Is it my favorite in the series? No. Did I like that we got to see other things? Yes. I feel like this was a good one to read right after the second book, because a lot of the plot kind of overlaps within this one and the second book. So there was a lot of time for me from when I read the second book and then I read this one. So I think it would have clicked better with me. Like, I know what happened in that one, but I had to keep kind of reminding myself what happened. But I still enjoyed it. It was sweet. It's a novella. You can't really expect a whole lot from a romance novella. So it got 3.5 stars, but I still very much enjoyed it. I then randomly picked up the first volume of Fence. I don't know why. On Hoopla, they have I think all of except for the last volume. If I'm correct, there's only 5. Maybe. So I randomly picked this one up because that's a really easy way for me to read graphic novels if I don't have them physically. and I've heard good things about this one. I've heard that if you kind of like the hardcover volumes, you might like this one. It's sportsy, which usually doesn't work, but it's fencing and there's a lot more to it. So I decided to give the first volume a chance because I was always a little bit curious, and if I didn't like it, then that was fine and I wasn't going to have to continue. Well, I ended up giving this one 4 stars. It's definitely more contemporary than romance. Like, I think there is a romantic element that's going to continue just based on some of the stuff that happens in this volume, but it basically is like these two guys who are headbutting. They're like rivals, and they're both fighting to be on the same fencing team. That's the moral of the story. It's them fighting for a spot. And so I think these volumes are going to be like, there's a few weeks of them kind of gearing up to figure out if they're on the team or not. And so one of them comes from like money, and he has been fencing and is like the best of the best, and the other one is really, really good, but he comes from nothing and he's on a scholarship, so if he doesn't make the team, then he can't go to the school anymore. And so it's them, and they're actually roommates, so they're forced to be around each other. So I'm interested to see where it goes. I'm invested in the team. There's definitely some characters that I'm like, you can go somewhere else, please, thank you. And there's some that I'm like, oh, you're a sweetheart, I want to keep hold of you. So I'm definitely interested to see where it's going to go. Not a whole lot happened in the first volume besides like setting up all the characters and kind of letting us know where the plot's going to go, but I liked it. I wanted to see what this was about, and I liked it. So I don't think I need to own these, but I do think I'm going to continue with the rest of them. And the very, very last book that I read in the month of April was Texas Destiny by Lorraine Heath, which is the first book in the Texas series, I think is what it's called. And this is the very start of our new buddy read. These are my friends that I did the Tessa Dare buddy read with. We really enjoyed all of Tessa Dare's books, and now we're diving into a different author, aka Lorraine Heath. And this is the very first series she ever wrote. We're doing just the series, I think. I'm not sure we're going to do any of the standalones. So this one was written in the 90s. I want to say 97. I have a whole like chart that tells me exactly when they were written, but this is her very, very first one. And I wasn't sure what to expect because I've only really read one other Western and enjoyed. I'm just not a Western person. So I was nervous going into this one, and I gave this one 4.5 stars. I loved this story. It follows our main two characters. We have Houston and Amelia. And Amelia has been corresponding with Houston's brother, Dallas. And Dallas has a whole farm, and he's basically trying to create a town. She comes from a rough situation, so she needs to get married to get away. And so they correspond for a while, and then she agrees to marry him and come to the town. And he's hoping by marrying her that A, he really, really wants an heir, a son that can come and kind of like take over the land once he's gone, but also to create a town. And by bringing her, more women will come in. She's not the first mail order bride, but she is, you know, the main one for his plans. And he ends up getting hurt, falling off his horse, and I think breaking his leg. So he can't go get her from the train, so he sends his brother Houston. Now, Houston was scarred in battle, so he's got scars all over his face, and he's got an eye patch over one eye, and he does not think highly of himself because of that. And so he's the one who's sent to pick up Amelia. And so the book starts with him picking her up, and they going on this like 3-week adventure back to Dallas's ranch so that Amelia can marry Dallas. Of course, something blossoms between the two of them. So I would say trigger warnings for this book for PTSD. This is honestly, this is a super, super beautiful, absolutely stunning romance between Houston and Amelia. I am obsessed with them as characters. I think they have some of the most beautiful moments. I think watching Houston break out of his shell was the sweetest thing, because at this time, the author had a note at the beginning of the book, at this time, if you had any kind of scarring on your face, you were looked at as not attractive anymore, so you probably weren't going to get married, and a lot of people would think lesser of you. So a lot of people who were in the same situation that Houston were in, unfortunately, would take their own lives, which is historically accurate. And so you have that conversation. There's no, like, suicide is not a thing in this book, but there is conversations about how hard it is, and Houston really just doesn't think highly of himself and thinks that he's not worth it, and thinks that he just needs, you know, he just needs to go hide in the corner and die, basically, like live out his life until he's gonna die. And she brings out the real him. She brings out some of his hopes and desires that like he's never told anybody about, and she kind of brings out this person that wants things again. And to see him break out of his shell, be able to talk to his brother about certain things, there's a lot of like issues in their like their brother relationship that aren't talked about, and then she kind of like makes them do that. And there's just I loved them. I genuinely loved them as a couple. And what I loved about the writing, because again, this is relatively early on in Lorraine Heath's writing career, is that a lot of times in historical romances, it is super easy to get invested in the characters, but to see not a whole lot of character growth, not to see a whole lot of depth to them. A lot of times you can see books where the characters are very one-dimensional or surface level. From page 1, I already could see layers from both of our characters. I could see the hints that there's way more to them than just the surface level. And the fact that I could see that within the first couple of chapters of this book was amazing. And I'm so emotionally invested in the series because this series follows all the brothers. The next book follows Dallas, and the third book follows their brother Austin. And so I think this is going to be such a fun buddy read. I loved, just genuinely, if you are wanting to dive into historical romance, but you don't want all of the like super cheesy, steamy, anything like that that you would think of as normally with historical romance, this is your book, because this is just, I mean, I can't even explain to you just how genuinely beautiful their relationship is. It was so stunning, and I loved everything about it. So I love them. Okay, the moral of the story is I loved them, and I'm so excited for this buddy read to continue and what other things Lorraine Heath has, because this was a phenomenal start. And that's it. Those are all of the books that I read in the month of April. I do hope that you guys enjoyed this very long video, as my wrap-ups tend to be. I have a lot of thoughts, and I just want to share all of them with you. As always, I chapter them, so feel free to, I know I'm saying this at the end of the video, but feel free to always just like jump to a specific book if you would like to know specific things. I chapter all of my wrap-ups. So let me know your thoughts if you read any of the books that I mentioned, or if there's a book that you read in April that you just want to rant or rave about, please let me know. And if you participated in the Magical Readathon, let me know if you completed your career. I just barely did. I like snuck it in at the very, very end, but I did do it, so that's exciting. But let me know how your Magical Readathon went. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there, as well as other fun bookish links, so check all of those out, and I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!